I've chosen is gun control. In the beginning of the year, I believe that there shouldn't be any stricter gun laws because it would limit the protection of the people, and people would get mad over this. This topic has many biases which make it an unending debate. Big picture. I'm researching gun control and whether or not there should be more or less control on the guns, and what are the pros and cons of each side. It's important because it includes the safety of people and conflicts with the Second Amendment rights to bear arms. In my first current events project, I found 3 potential causes that cause shootings. The first one is the psychology of the shooter himself. The second one is the environment that violence is in the culture where the shooting took place. And the third one is the access to guns there. In 2011, there have been estimated 32,000 gun deaths, and 11,000 of them being homicides in the United States. Here's a picture of how the 50 states match up on gun violence and how they're ranked. My current events project number 2, I researched an article about gun control in other places of the world. This article is about gun control in Australia. John Howard, the Prime Minister of Australia, made a law that was first passed in 1996 in response to a massacre. The law banned all semi-automatic, automatic, and shotguns in Australia. Howard cites a study that found firearm homicides fell by 59% and the firearm suicide rate fell by 65% in a decade after the law was introduced, without an increase in non-firearm homicide or suicides. With these improvements, this shows how well the law worked in Australia. This connects to my big topic because it shows how other governments are doing gun control. Here's a short clip of John Howard talking about his decisions on the gun control legislation he made in Australia and what he thinks about it.
My central argument was that it's the ready availability of automatic and semi-automatic weapons that is the big problem. Because if you have immediately at hand a weapon that can kill a lot of people in a short period of time, what then happens is that an impulse, a hateful impulse, is turned into a murderous assault. And although issues like mental health and background checks are very important, and I don't suggest otherwise, the key thing in the Australian experience is that if you remove these lethal automatic and semi-automatic weapons, the murder rate from the use of guns does decline. Because, put frankly, it's easier to kill 10 people with a gun than it is with a knife.
States had many changes to the gun control legislation. Many big restrictions of guns in history, like the 1968 law that prohibits all convicted felons, drug users, and mentally ill from buying guns, as well as raising the age restriction for buying guns from the federal law to 21 years of age. Also, nearly 1 million gun sales have been rejected by thorough background checks. This fits into my bigger picture of gun control because it shows what our government has done in the past about guns. Here's a video about some example past gun control legislation that have been created.
Gun control has a long and very checkered history in this country, and as with the current debate, it's been driven largely by tragedy, massacres, and assassinations. Joining us with some perspective is presidential historian Doug Brinkley. Doug, good morning.
Good morning to you.
We can take this back. I mean, let's look at this history, because you can take it back to 1934 and FDR, can't you?
Yes, I mean, in the 1920s during Prohibition, you had all of these people with submachine guns. The gangsters started coming around. FDR came in 1933 as president, wanted to start curbing these, and he started gun control by levying big taxes, heavy taxes on gun manufacturers. The idea was to really ban Tommy guns or anything that could be used for a non-hunting weapon.
And then the next big legislation came in 1968 under Lyndon Johnson.
Well, in that case, it really came cause of tragedy. I mean, we had both of the Kennedy brothers killed, Martin Luther King. People wanted to do something. One of the things that was popular to get rid of in '68 was mail order guns. Lee Harvey Oswald had ordered his from an NRA, American Rifleman magazine, and so that got thrown out. But both in '34 and '68, it was trying to keep the criminals, felons, and mentally insane, from having weapons.
And that ultimately led to the creation of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, didn't it?
In 1972, then, that gets created as another, organization. And Treasury is constantly trying to tax guns, get some money if you're going to be a gun owner. The idea being a lot of fringe people won't be able to pay for guns if there's a very steep tax.
Mm-hmm. And then we had the assault weapons ban under President Clinton in 1994. Now, what precipitated that?
Ronald Reagan's being shot early in 1981. Brady, his press secretary, became, deeply wounded and in a wheelchair from all of that. But it takes time. One of the things about, guns, it's not overnight. I mean, something like Newtown happens, and we think we've got to have gun legislation. Well, it's going to be a process. And so sometimes as long as, 8 years, once it really starts going in earnest, in the opposition, the NRA wants to, the longer they draw it out, the less chances there are you're going to get gun legislation quickly.
So how does the Obama administration use the momentum and the public sentiment from Sandy Hook, from the Tucson shooting, to push this forward? We've seen the Newtown families in Washington this past week, very powerful testimony.
Well, I think President Obama, if you listen to his last State of the Union address and his inaugural, he is not going to let go of Newtown. He's decided that this is something he must accomplish on his watch. So he's going to do speeches, talks, rallies, interviews, use Joe Biden, who's becoming the head of the task force, use every weapon, so to speak, that you can in your political arsenal to try to get some kind of ban on assault weapons, and certainly limiting the magazines that are able to be sold.
All right. Doug Brinkley, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
For my fourth current event, I researched an article about Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting and whether it proves the United States would require more gun control. The article shows both sides of the argument, with people going for more gun control saying that the United States has a higher gun death than most other developed countries, and more gun control would lower that. While the advocates of gun rights say if more people had guns, people would be afraid of committing crimes. I agree with both sides on some parts. Gun laws would restrict the access of guns, and it could only affect people who follow the law, because if someone was going to commit a crime anyways, they might be willing to steal a gun if they didn't have one already. I also believe that having tougher gun laws might not affect the law-abiding people, because if they had no criminal history or no intent to do anything illegal, they should have no problem obtaining a gun if they wanted to. And it would keep anyone out who might be a criminal. The article connects to my main topic of gun control because it shows how current events have influenced the opinions of others. Here's a political cartoon. It has to do with school shootings. Originally, they say the kid said he doesn't want to go to school, but now, after a bunch of school shootings, the mother is saying it. She doesn't want him to. Here, my view on topic has stayed the same. I concluded over the air that guns can't be banned because there are too many supporters of guns. More background checks, making them harder to get to, but more security could be a strong compromise.